Thank you all for joining us and for returning for the exciting second installation of a conversation that Professor Corbett gave last week, on Tuesday, excuse me, on managing change and ambiguity in our organizations. Gosh, what a timely and very realistic and important topic. I'm Laura Dietrich. I'm the Associate Director at the Nonprofit Institute. And this webinar series has been put together in partnership with our colleagues and friends at the Fieldstone Leadership Network San Diego. We appreciate them and all you Fieldstone folks that are on this call, as well as our broader nonprofit community. This is actually kind of a bittersweet day in that this is the final webinar component in our webinar series, Fortify, and we will be resuming some webinar activities relating to presenting needs, things that you tell us you want to learn more about, expertise you want brought to the table as we move forward. And you can look for some announcements about that in late July. So we're quite excited about that. As before, I'm just going to quickly remind you that this webinar runs until 1 o'clock. It's so grab your lunch. It's a lunch hour webinar, but Lynn will stay on the call longer for after hours. If you have questions, please, you are all muted, but if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Cynthia Fernandez is available, and you should have received an email from her if you have any technical difficulties. So we're happy to respond to the needs of the community, and you know, we're going to send you an evaluation. You can let us know if we've been getting it right. Very excited conversation that began on Tuesday, Lynn, correct? Some really interesting conversation, and you guys are quite fortunate. I feel fortunate that we have Lynn here to facilitate the second half of that. And with that, enough of me. Thank you. I really sincerely thank all of you who participated and joined with us in this and all of the Fortify series. So with that, Lynn, take it away.
All right, thanks, Laura, and thanks, Cynthia, for this your facilitation of this the whole series. As Laura mentioned, this series has been quite exciting, and we're looking forward to talking about the adaptive leader. Previously, we were speaking about the adaptive organization, and we covered a few things there. We had this cool guy with the beard, and this is how we started last time. It says that Charles Darwin is not most intellectual of this. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able to adapt and to adjust best to the changing environment in which it finds itself. We spoke about the key words here being it finds itself. So it didn't choose it, it finds itself, and it must be able to adjust to the changing environment. So we covered also that adaptive organization always has to look at the mindset of the organization, thinking to ourselves that if we think about just getting through this, it's very different if we're thinking about emerging better as a result of it, or adapting and emerging based on how we adapt it. The people who just talk about let's just getting through it, their mindset's going to be a little bit different, and their actions going to be a little bit different, and it may or may not impact the future. We have talked about being inquisitive and about how engaging people at all levels. These are all adaptive leadership principles that people follow in a way to ensure that their organization is adapting. And naming the elephant in the room was, who are we? What are our strengths? Where are our areas of development? Where are we on our life cycle of an organization? And then in innovation, having multiple experiments going on at the same time, of course, using some data to help drive that. Where is it that we want to be? Where are we thinking outside of the box? So we talked about principles and get some clear examples about those. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time here, I wanted to make sure I reviewed that so we can put it in context. We also talked about Kotter's 8 steps of change, and I mentioned that these change principles are essential to any change management philosophy. You should have received these slides. If you don't have slides now, just put it in the chat and we'll make sure we get it to you, or we'll get it to you at the end of this presentation. This is 8 steps. I've used Cotter for a number of years, over 15, and when my projects fail, it's because something here is not there. But they're all basic steps here, but there are something like, oh, there's no surprise here. It may not be a surprise, but sometimes we don't do them in this order, or somebody gives us an idea and it throws off the path. All because somebody gives us an idea or we change doesn't mean that we need to not do a philosophy. And this allows us to establish it, but also allows us to wrap some measurements around it as well. So we're going to talk now specifically today. We're talking about what does it mean to be an adaptive leader. And I'm going to open up my chat box. I'm going to allow you to go ahead and write some either questions and answers, or if you have any chats that you'd like to share, I can try and talk to you about that. And Cynthia and I will be able to facilitate that. So they talk about these 3 levels of leadership when we're talking about adaptive leadership. I mentioned that Heifetz is my guy. He's the guy who Leadership on the Line and a lot of other books where I feel like he is truly looking at this from in a way that could develop individuals as leaders, but also from organizations. So he talks about level 1 leadership, which is just setting the direction, the mission, the vision, the goals, taking immediate action when it arises. So that's level 1 leadership, which is where we are and we often find ourselves, and which is really not that difficult for many of us. Also talks about level 2 leadership, which is where you're creating that motivation, right? Teamwork, the spirit, right? They talk about this commitment and alignment. That's level 2 leadership. And then we talk about, from an adaptive perspective, this level 3 leadership, facing it as not it being a technical challenge alone, which is something that can be solved pretty easily, even by decree, but something that creates meaning, innovative change, dealing with issues, and also framing them in the way that you're able to look at them differently, and then really a focus on organizational learning. So this is just really me setting up the framework for here, and then we'll talk a little bit about it, because if we had a pretty good time on Tuesday, and if this is your first time here, again, you can look at the recording, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to address all of this kind of good stuff that we're sharing here. We also talked about adaptive learning and this productive zone being the disequilibrium, where sometimes you have to feel like things aren't comfortable or at all times. To grow, true growth comes with a certain level of discomfort. And this right here sometimes is when people are pretty happy, you got to ask them the right questions or push them into this zone. When people are too upset about it, you've pushed too much. So how do we create this section that allows us to truly get the best out of people, truly get the best out of our meetings by having this constructive disequilibrium, which is referred to as the productive zone? It's very interesting when we know that someone's going to ask us a bunch of questions. What do? We prepare more. And if we prepare more, that person just got us into our productive zone, because we did some more research. We asked more of the harder questions. We did a number of different things to move them there. So I think that is essential in this work. People often at times expect us to see through the fog, expect us to see around the corner. And the reality is that we don't know what's coming around that corner, but we have to make sure that we, although they depend on us, what is it? And I believe one of our responsibilities as leaders is to lift the fog. An adaptive leader lifts the fogs for others so they can see the path clearly. Right. So how do we do that? Well, the thing is, we address it head on. Often at times, we can walk into a room and we can feel fog. We can walk into a room and it seems cloudy, it seems foggy. And what do? Do we slow down? Do we turn on the headlights and shine a light on it? Do we turn our music down in a way that we could hear what's going on? Or do we power through it and hope that it gets better? Well, an adaptive leader doesn't look at it as power better. It's just saying that we need to address it. Someone says, oh, this is going on. I know what's going on. Somebody else will address it. No one else will, right? It won't get better. You have a talent to identify challenges often. And are we going to address them, or are we going to let them go and hope that they be addressed? So these are a number of things that we're looking at, and we'll talk about what are some ways to address that. So this equilibrium I talk about, it's that power and trust that is given to authority to remain the tolerable levels of stress. So the diagram talks about this tolerable level of stress, where people feel somewhat protective. It feels like it's a safe environment. We push sometimes too hard, or we feel that a strong leader sometimes is somebody who's got to bark out these orders, and really that's not it. There's many different styles of leadership. There's the great man theory, where, oh, this one person's got to do it. There's this charismatic leadership, right? There's all of these different levels of leadership. But here, from an adaptive perspective, if you're going to push people, if you're going to make sure that the people there, that level of protection has to be there, and the positioning, the norms, and the direction has to be there also. So it's about protection, order, and direction. And when you hear and do any of the research on this, and I do have some references at the end here, you'll talk about this. As I'm pushing people into this productive zone, it's from protection perspective, order, and then the direction, right? So that's me kind of wrapping this up for you. The adaptive leader is someone who anticipated employs a broad-based style of command. They take risk and make decisions, learn from events, and adjust plans accordingly. You know, I put this chameleon because it's that adaptive leader sometimes is almost like blending itself into the environment. How can you know best is to blend yourself into environments sometimes so that you have the opportunity to use your skills. I said this before, one thing that if you have a tool belt, and I believe my role in life is to add tools to your tool belt. So if you have a tool belt and you are now trying to find out what tool to use, if you're embedded in the environment, you can identify that tool. If you go in there and you're using your hammer, a hammer only sees nails. So I want you not to only use that hammer or thinking that the hammer is the best way to resolve it, which some leaders do, but if you're blending yourself in there, you can identify what tools should I use, right? What risks should I take? What are the decisions that I'm gonna make? How are we adjusting our plans and how are we learning from them? So that's essentially what an adaptive leader gives you the ability to do. So that approach from an adaptive leader is we recognize that there's just not one right answer. So the reason I sent my slides in advance is because this is a little bit of a wordy one. I'm not going to cover all of them, but I want to make sure that you get the premise of it, but also you have something to take with you. So, you know, the person also looks at there's no right answer. You're balancing the risk, right? You're learning from each other. And then you're also looking at perspective and the perspectives of others, right? You help people see differently, right? You're able to help yourself see differently. The question of, well, fine, we all agree, I understand that. But if we were not to agree, if someone came in and said, this is the wrong way, why would they say that? So we're studying it and understanding it, and we're looking at all sides of it, right? Now, someone says, well, I use this philosophy. That's just another skill that you can use embedded in there, right? This is not saying, hey, this is the one all, it takes over everything. But what we're saying is that you have other tools. And if you look at it from an adaptive perspective, these are some principles that you can follow and also adopt in order for you personally, but for your organization. But if we talk about moving an organization forward and we follow adaptive leadership to move an organization forward, you still need to have leadership in order to do that. People have to lead. And people often ask me, what's my definition of leadership? I believe my definition of leadership is that leadership is intentional, right? It just won't happen. So I encourage you to figure out, well, what is it that you have in your whole life been thinking about what leadership is to you? There is no true definition of leadership. If you look up and you Google it, you'll find 20 million different definitions. I believe that you should have your own definition of leadership, right? I believe that a leader is somebody who stands at the door and is looking outside. Someone who's a management or lower is at the door looking inside. The reason I say the leadership isn't out in the community because the leader still needs to be there, right? They need to be able to look forward, right? A leadership on the line, Heifetz and Linsky, they talk about these, I'm gonna read this one because I think it's important here. The dangers of exercising leadership derive from the nature of the problems for which leadership is necessary. Adaptive change stimulates resistance. Resistance challenges people's habits. It stimulates resistance. It challenges people's habits, beliefs, and values. It asks them to take a loss, experience uncertainty, and even to express disloyalty to people and cultures. Loss, disloyalty, feeling, and compliment. No wonder people resist. So what I want you to do now is I'm going to ask you to go to your the chat box here, and I want you to tell me what do you feel like some of the important words are that are here on this in this sentence. What are the most important words that you feel are important to this? What words come to mind when you see this sentence when talking about leadership and the dangers of exercising leadership? Okay, I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds. Anybody can think about what word stands out when you read this? What word is like really important? Uncertainty, right? Yes, right. And this is uncertain times, right? This uncertainty, very nice. Anyone else? Any words that are there for you that pop out to you like, yeah, that's a really pretty important word there. Leadership creates change. Very nice. Leadership is necessary, right? And I like this sentence here that it says it asks them to take a loss, experience uncertainty, and it challenges people's habits, beliefs, and values, right? I tell people all the time is that all because you've done it that way a long time, all because society says, oh, this is good, it doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's right, right? I can ask people, why is this important to you? Why do you want to address diversity, equity, inclusion? Well, because it's important to me. Why? Because I think it's the right thing to do. Why? Because everybody else is doing it. It doesn't get to the issue of why we want to do this. Once you're able to identify the why you want to do it, then everybody buys in and you have a purpose, right? When you identify what that why is, then it doesn't fall by the wayside. It doesn't be like, okay, let's talk about that later, right? So there's a theory that if you ask somebody the 5 whys, you'll get down to the true root of it, right? So why are we doing this? Why do we want to do it? And it's going to challenge often at times our habits, our beliefs, and our values and societal norms. Okay, leaders lead, managers manage. Very nice, thank you for that. Okay, so I talked about anytime anybody will talk to you about adaptive leadership, they talk to you about these 2 things here. Is it a technical challenge or an adaptive challenge? And often at times, when you look at it from a technical, it's known, it's clear. An expert could come in and say, good, this is the way we do it. You are experts at your field, you're experts at your work. So you see a problem, it's technical, it's known, it's clear, this is how we solve it. The bottom one here is an adaptive. It's unclear. We all are gonna have to take the answer and we're gonna have to do this as a group, right? But sometimes they're technical and they're also, they're a combination, they're technical and adaptive. And as adaptive leaders, we need to figure out what they are. So it's often assigned, resolved with the expert and the group as a whole. Okay, so how do you diagnose the challenge, right? So people are like, well, okay, I see it as a challenge. I figured out it's an adaptive challenge. It's not technical. It's not something where I can say, let's just do a different payroll company, or let's just move this change this and remove this from a position or a job description. It's not as easy and simple as that. So what is the system, right? What are the structure, the culture, and the processes, right? They often say if you've seen one nonprofit board, you've only seen one nonprofit board because they're all so unique. And with that uniqueness, they have their own culture, right? Their own processes, their own structure. And I visit a lot of boards, plenty of boards, and they're all gonna be very different. So I have to realize how do I diagnose the challenge? One is by looking at the system that's there. Also trying to figure out the challenge, right? Is the challenge that we are all dependent on authority, right? We all aren't listening. They often talking about listen to the song and the words underneath the song, right? What is it that it's truly saying here? And then diagnose the political landscape, right? What are the values, the loyalties, right? Often at times people are saying, well, maybe you should run for office or somebody should run for office, that's great. And it's just like, for me, office is important, political is great. And I realize that, but I often realize that some of the decisions you make, there's a winner and there's a loser, right? And often at times people are weighing how many of the winners there are versus the loser. And that's not something that I think is my decision to make. It's to educate people so that they can make their own decisions and where the alliances are also. So that's one way of diagnosing the challenge. Feel free if you have any questions of what I'm saying in the box here. And again, I'll take some at the end here. So the adaptive leader role, right? I talked about it, discerning the technical challenges, right? Also, and I'm not gonna, these are again, are notes for you, but regulating the disequilibrium we talked about a little bit, develop and share responsibility, right? It's a shared responsibility, creating a shared vision, infuse the work in meaning, and then pass it on, right? Often at times, somebody will come in and ask a question, sending them away with, what would you do, versus just giving them the answer. I'm teaching a culture of being adaptive. I'm teaching people how to assess, how to diagnose problems, right? Because I want to build other leaders who are also adaptive, right? So my job alone isn't about giving the answer. My job is about one part, which is giving and helping people, but also helping them figure out themselves in the future. I used to love it. People come to me all day long. Oh, what about this? What about this? And I gave them answers. And then at the end of the day, I gave everybody answers and none of my work is done. And I know many of you feel the same way, right? But how do I have them to think about it? Well, what do you think about it? They said, well, I don't know. That's why I came here. Well, go home and think about it. Or we'll talk tomorrow, you can think about it. Or why don't you get a group of people together and analyze it, and then we can discuss it, right? Because I sit there thinking that there already has been research, it already has been discussed, and now we're able to talk about it. So how am I developing my people in that way also? So there are some dangers of adaptive leadership, right? Sometimes it's like this, oh, this is the process. It's people are feeling attacked by this, right? We're pushing a little bit too hard. People are feeling like they're lured into it. Oh no, this is adaptive leadership. So there's this lure that is like, oh, it's going to be something that's different. It's not the answer end all, right? And then people feel like there's going to be a loss there, or sometimes people feel like they're being marginalized because of these processes. So it's just something to keep in mind. I know my strengths, and people talk about this weaknesses. No, it's not weaknesses. I know my strengths, and sometimes I know my places where they're blind spots, right? So what are my strengths? And adaptive leadership has a significant amount of strengths. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of doing. It's a way of movement, a way of change. But the blind spots are that people could feel attacked. The blind spots are that people feel like this is the answer to end all answers, right? It's going to answer everything. And then that, so making sure that you understand in these movements, what you decide, what's the difference between what my strength is, or organizational strength is, and then what am I missing? So for example, one of my strengths, you can do strength finders, you can do any of this. I am in the achieve philosophy under my strengths. So if I walk around with this achieve in a meeting, in a discussion, I'm trying to get through it. I'm trying to get through all of the agenda items, right? If I'm trying to get through all of the agenda items, I have to ask myself, my blind spot is getting it through by any means necessary. But I have to ask myself, am I pushing this through by any means necessary, or am I allowing the conversation to happen? So is it the achiever in me that's trying to just get this done? Or is it me really respecting people? It's a blind spot that I have, and I need to be aware of that. So I'll stop there, and I'll just see if you have anything that anybody wants to add, anything that anybody wants to throw into the box there. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I talk fast, so you feel free to say, slow down. Feel free to say, I have this question, because I'm really going to go into some of these strategies right now. So let's just see. Give me a thumbs up. Is this working for everybody? How's everybody doing? If people taking naps, people eating their lunch. Red Sox. Okay, well that means that, did I say Red Sox? Or it says text box. Oh, I said Red Sox, put it in the Red Sox. I meant put it in the text box. I don't know. Okay, well, let's get back into it. All right, so thanks, Scott. All right, so now let's see what we have here. You said New Yorker. Oh, that's it. That's probably Scott. I know it's Scott Trick. So yes, I'm a New Yorker, but I'm a Mets fan. I'm not a Yankees fan, so don't hate me. And the Mets don't ever win, so thank you for being sympathetic. So we talk about this adaptive leadership strategies as these philosophies. I'm going to go through each of these, and these will help you. Hopefully you're able to walk away with some key points in each of these, so that we're able to identify what specifically that I can take away from this work. All right. So what are you going to take away from our hour discussion, our hour together? We have 30 minutes left. I'm going to go through each of these components and highlight some specific areas. And I want you writing down what you think this means to you. What can you incorporate? What is shining a light on your work? And what is going to help you become a better leader in this role? So first one is get into the balcony, right? Next one, thinking politically. The next one is orchestrating a process, not following it, right? But allowing it to be there. Orchestrate, that word orchestrate looks very different. Hold steady, not giving up, right? Manage your hungers, being where you're being pulled, anchor yourself, and of course, maintaining a sacred heart. This is about compassion, right? It's about the love of the game, the love of our work. How are we maintaining that, right? We have some difficult decisions sometimes to make, and it doesn't mean that we need to make them without compassion, right? So let's talk about each of these in a way that we can kind of dig a little bit deeper down here. So the first one here is getting into the balcony, right? The dance floor is cool. The dance floor is happy. People have a good old time. So you're up there, you're cutting a rug, right? Having a good old time and doing your two-step. Well, the reality is that if you're on that dance floor, you only see what's around you, and sometimes immediacy around you. You can't see in the distance. You can't see where what's happening. You can't see where people are congregating. So when you get into the balcony, it allows you to see a different picture. I don't think you should stay in the balcony, but when I'm in the balcony, I'm able to see what systems are in place. I'm able to observe patterns. I'm able to discern true meetings, but I'm also a time for me to personally reflect. In this picture, it's a good example of it. By himself, not like, hey, I'm up here, we're all partying still. It's a time to reflect. Reflection is a leadership principle. We often at times don't have the opportunity to reflect because we're glad we got through something. What have we learned from it, right? After all of my events, I do a reflection. I follow a SWOT analysis, believe it or not because the SWOT analysis is the best, but it's because it allows us to dig it down in a format. What were our strengths in this event? What were some things that we didn't think about and that people might perceive them as areas of weakness? Where are our opportunities now and in the future? And then also, what threats were there? What happens is, if I don't have a format to follow, people are just throwing things out. We get them all, maybe, right? You want to make sure that you're getting them all. So now when I do it that way, my team knows that's the way we do it. So they're writing it out and they're figuring it out also. So figuring out what's going on, reflection. I start off a lot of my meetings, particularly a lot of my classes, with what did we learn? What did we unlearn? What can or did we apply since the last time we put you together? And we're just asking ourselves, sometimes you have to unlearn stuff, right? And this is that period of time for that, particularly with what we're going through as a society right now. So getting into the balcony is one of the ones that I think is key here. The second one is thinking politically, right? And it doesn't mean, political in the way that we're thinking about what we hear about as politicians, but we see it as politically as like, what is going to be the best way to do it? People often look at it as like chess, right? I'm doing this relationship dance. If you want to have key relationships, if you want to have strong relationships, you have to work at them, right? So what am I doing to work at these relationships to strengthen them? I tell people all the time, if you have a good relationship, you should try and take it to the next level. Well, I don't need to worry about this person because we're here. I think you take it to the next level and think about how am I not developing good relationships, because I'm developing great relationships. So when challenges like this that we're facing, they go back down to being good, right? So the court the undecided, right? Helping people understand that if they're saying, hey, I'm either way with it, I'm undecided, how are we making sure that we're balancing it and getting people on board here, right? Allowing time for transition, right? And they hear, so very interesting, they're saying, leave behind those that cannot make the change, right? And that's an interesting philosophy. Sometimes people believe if you leave those behind that cannot make the change versus putting all your attention into one of those two individuals, the process will help bring them along. Or maybe time for them to get off the bus, right? They talk about good to great for the social sector, often talks about getting the right people on the bus, right? And when you're getting the right people on the bus, you're actually getting the wrong people off the bus. So just some of those thoughts. Also, that book, Good to Great for the Social Sectors, is extremely small, much smaller than Good to Great, but it's really specific to the nonprofit sector. So if you haven't looked at it, it's a very short read, right? This guy right here, he's an orchestrating, right? So he's dialed in, right? Often at times people say, well, he knows how to play some of these interests, but he knows what he wants to see and he's orchestrating. If you were to look at orchestrating your process of change, Orchestration, your process of leadership where you're figuring out, how am I doing this? How am I moving my organization here, right? Some of the things that you're going to do are going to be very, very unique, right? So if I'm orchestrating the process, one of the things I'm doing is I'm measuring temperature at all times. You know, what's going on here? How do I keep that temperature at the right place? Not to where everybody's extremely happy and the work's not getting done, but not to where everybody's walking around angry, right? Figuring how do I make that happen? And it says here, just you're putting people almost into a pressure cooker or a stressful holding environment, as long as you're keeping it safe and people understand it. When people understand that I'm asking hard questions, they know I just asked the hard question to move us along. They don't take it personally because they know that we have this acceptance of asking hard questions, right? If you can allow that culture of inquiry, that acceptance of those questions, then your organization is going to move forward. They often talk about giving the work back to the people. People say, how can we have a better environment? How can we have a more inclusive environment? Why don't you guys go ahead and I want you guys to figure it out. You know what? I'm sick and tired of trying to figure it out. You have to have people take up the work themselves and do it. So it's your turn to do the work, right? Not my turn to say, hey, this is what it is. So sometimes giving the work back to people, I gave you an example of sending employees away and saying, why don't you think about it? Why don't you do some research on it, right? Why don't you Google it, right? Figure it out and move it in a way that moves the organization. And also sometimes people need to see interventions that are going to be short and simple. Right? There's a 90-day strategy. A friend of mine has it on YouTube. And for those of you who take sessions with me, I always talk about this 90-day strategy. What can you accomplish in the next 90 days? And I'm looking at it from what are my assets, right? And then what are my assets? And then what are my actions? So what I want to do is, if we were gonna, I'm gonna ask 4 or 5 of you to answer this in the chat window. So if we're gonna throw a party right now, we're gonna throw a party in the next 10 to 15 minutes. What do you think we need to include? What do you think we need to think about? What do you think we need to do if we're gonna throw a party? Okay, and for those of you who just go ahead and write some things, 1, 2, or 3 things that you think we need to do if we're gonna throw a party right now. I'll need 1 or 2 of you just to write something. If you want, just keep writing. What's the purpose of the party? Very nice. Who to invite? Very nice. Will we be wearing masks? Very nice. We'll all be 6 feet apart too. What else? The playlist, right? The food, right? The money, the event, all of that stuff, right? Well, red Solo cups. What kind of party is not without red Solo cups, right? So you have all of these information, but the question here is that when you're trying to solve a challenge or when you're trying to implement a strategy, the first question you ask yourself is, what are the assets we already have? If I start doing to the actions, sometimes I'm not asking what are the assets I already have. Of course, I asked it in a way to set you up, so I apologize, but it helps make the point. So I have to ask myself on this group chat, is anybody a planner already? Does anybody a party planner? What do we have? Well, we know we have space. Well, we know we have somebody's backyard. Well, we know we have Zoom. Well, we know we have Google. Well, we know we have other people have done this work. So when people are asking you, okay, we're gonna go do this event or we're gonna do this, we always start with what do we have first? And that's what I want you to do. I want you to start at what do we have first. Once we figure out all the assets we have, then we can start talking about the actions. But if we jump into actions, we're gonna not figure out all the assets. Sometimes I'll mention something like red Solo cups. Somebody's like, great, red Solo cups, let's do it. Let's have a theme party on that. And they're off, and we still haven't discussed all the assets. So making sure we're identifying all the assets first before we move it. Dave Logan, good friend of mine, he has a video that he uses to describe this on YouTube. It's worth a listen. It's very short, 15 minutes or so, I believe. Okay, so I'm trying to make sure we keep on time, but this is good, and thank you for your party suggestions. So I talked about holding steady, right? Knowing that you're gonna have to take some heat. Right? Knowing that it's not going to be an easy, knowing that you have multiple experiments going on. And when spirits are going on, you have to push it a little bit. Breakthroughs happen when you are sometimes allowing it to develop. It says here, patiently let the issues ripen, right? Doesn't mean that you need to jump in all the time right away. Allow it to ripen. Allow sometimes things to fester, right? You're asking questions versus answers. You're resolving them in a way that gives it patience, right? As opposed to, okay, we got to get in there, we got to solve this so we can move on, right? So you're gonna take heat. Things are gonna ripen in a way sometimes slower than even when you might like them. But if you know that's what I'm doing, this is an experiment, and I'm allowing that experiment, well, then I will have the breakthroughs. If I talk about it as being a kindergarten science experiment, and the water's going to turn red when I put food coloring in it, that alone is going to not be the answer. Sometimes it's an experiment, and I need to know that there's multiple experiments going on. I need to observe them in a way. And what happens is, if I call it an experiment, even though it sounds like a little weird, but I would treat it a little bit differently, right? Because I'm looking at what's going to emerge. I'm looking at what's going to happen, right? And sometimes I have to, which it says here, suspend my reality. You know, I believe that this is a point in time in our community, in our world and environment, that the reality that people thought things were may not be. It may not come to what they thought it was. The environments and the life that they once led was a farce, right? Their environment sometimes was not the way it was equal for others, not the way some people saw it. And the reality here is that we will not come out of this the same way. If we know we're not going to come out of this the same way, how are we prepping? How are we adapting to what the future will be? I've said this at our last session, is every time we've ever faced big issues like we're facing right now in the world, it's always been a significant change thereafter. Good, bad, indifferent, it's always going to be a change thereafter. So what are we doing to prepare for that change? Adaptive leadership principles help you identify that, but that's just one way. Okay, so maintaining a sacred heart, right? Quality of heart, right? You have to realize there's these three things here: innocence, curiosity, and compassion, right? There's a difference in way that I ask something where I'm curious, and a different way where I ask something where I'm all-knowing, right? How do I know that I'm going to make sure my quality of heart stays up? Innocent, it's a quality of heart: innocence, curiosity, and compassion. There were some world leaders that were having conversations, and when you speak to them and you say, what is the number one thing that you think people could learn from? And they say, a love of the game, of the quality of the heart, the compassion for others, right? That's like the secret sauce that bonds all these things together. Kuzes and Posner calls it, essentially they refer to it some more of the heart, but it's really about the care and love for others. But we have to realize that innocence sometimes could come across as cynicism, could come across as being realism, naive. So there's things that you have to monitor, that even though your quality of heart is really about this innocence, how it could be perceived. My curiosity could be arrogance, right? It could be that people thinking that I think I know everything, or I know the answer already and I'm just grilling them, right? The other one is the compassion. Sometimes is callousness, right? Or like it's really not compassion. People think it's really more of just a thick skin experience is what they refer to it as, right? So manage your hungers, right? Looking at this is more about the intimacy and delights that needs must be met appropriately, right? If I'm intimate, if I am understanding, if I am the presence, if I'm blending in my environment, the needs are going to be met differently, right? So you have to be that level of intimacy, and they use the word purposely. Intimacy will help an adaptive leader thrive, understand a little bit more, identify it's an adaptive challenge or not, right? Use traditional rituals to help with the roles and identify the difference in roles, demarcate your roles and the roles of others, right? So transition allows you to truly transition environments. Sometimes people say, well, we're gonna look very different, but our structures are gonna stay the same. Well, that sometimes is a recipe for disaster. Asking myself, if we are gonna look very different, if we are gonna move things in a different direction, how is that in a way that we can respect people I have an understanding of the power levels, control, affirmations, right? And I'm using all of these as tools. The hunger inside me as an achiever just wants to get it done. And sometimes I'm going to do whatever it does just to get it done so I can move on to the next thing. And I don't respect the efforts of power and control. Even sometimes the louder voice in the room is there. I have to respect that. Who am I as an individual? How am I blending in? And how am I having this understanding of the environment? So I did a few of these already. If you can just say in the chat thing, I got it, thumbs up, or you have a question. I want to make sure this is helpful. This format doesn't really allow us to be as helpful as we would want it to be, but I think it's important. So right in there, let me know if we're right on the right track here. And Cynthia, I know we have a group here of 16. If you don't mind opening it up, so if they want, they can just unmute themselves and ask me a question also. All right, so they don't seem like the writing type, which we all are not, so I get it. But it's, Cynthia, if you can let them do that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so if you have a chance, you can unmute yourself and you can ask a question. Thank you for all of you for hopping on and staying with us here. Okay, we're gonna go to the next one here. This one is anchor yourself, right? Don't confuse oneself with one's professional role. They often talk about asking people and involving your whole environment and being inquisitive, but not thinking about my level of, my question should only be at the leadership team table. It's figuring out not based on rank, but am I helping people more generally understand this without talking about roles alone, right? Identify, my allies and who are they, right? Not using them only for confidence as far as getting information and go, but who are my allies that can help through this process, right? Also, this is a time for you to anchor yourself and ground yourself. You have to figure out, how am I feeding my own soul? What am I doing to make sure that I'm caring for myself? If you can't care for yourself, if yourself not prepared, you can't care for others, right? So we all know that when people say, hey, Lynn, we're gonna have a meeting around 12 o'clock, make sure you eat, because we don't wanna be around you if you haven't eaten. And the point here is that we wanna make sure that you're preparing yourself to bring your best to what's to come. In order to do that, you have to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Personal reflection, having activities like these calm apps, or breathing periods of time where you can say, okay, I feel grounded again, right? This work is not easy, this work is hard, right? And also put yourself on the line a little here, right? Figuring out what is it that we have to do in order to kind of move this forward. And sometimes it's gonna take a little push on our end. So anchoring yourself is gonna be pretty important here. So we have roughly about 10 minutes left. I just want to kind of talk to you about these adaptive leadership learning methods that people often do. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I will say that you'll hear stuff about case in point. What is the here and the now? What are we doing with the here and the now and not outside factors, right? This is kind of contradictory when I talk about as far as strategy goes and looking off into the distance, but there are periods of time where you have to shift people to the here and now. What is this saying? What are we saying? What are we doing right now, right? Owning up to your part of the mess, your part from where we are. Later on here, I put some 360 in coaching. I believe that coaching is often the answer. The Nonprofit Institute is doing this resilient coaching where you can get a certified coach to work with you for 1 or 2 sessions during this time of uneasiness. And Cynthia, if you don't mind, if you can please put that access there in the chat window so that people can access these resources, right? Often at times you feel like you're alone because you don't want to tell your staff, you don't want to tell your team everything, you don't want to tell your board. This is an opportunity where you can talk to somebody who's a certified coach who can help process this stuff with you. It's also an opportunity for you to ground yourself, right? And then also this thing mentioning here, again, about the fog and other metaphors, right? Using some things, painting a picture for people to understand what this is. These are the learning methods that you can use to help others. And again, thank you, Cynthia, so much. Resilience-based coaching, if you click there, you can sign up there and you can have a coach meet with you to help. So these are the 2 homework assignments. I'm a professor. I'm always going to give you homework. These are the 2 homework assignments I'm going to give you before we start the questions and answers, if you have any. The first one: what are adaptive leadership challenges you face, and what is your role in applying adaptive leadership principles to solve them? So what is it that you, what principles have you heard, have you learned, have you thought about that you can use to tackle what you might see as an adaptive challenge? What principles, philosophies can you use right now to say, hey, I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to figure out what is, this is definitely a technical challenge. Where is it that I need to grow in a certain way that I can say, I'm adding these more tools to my tool belt? That's one there. And then the other one, what are the key takeaways, right, for your organization? And what 3 actions can you start tomorrow to become a more adaptive leader? So what 3 actions can you start tomorrow to become a more adaptive leader? Okay, so let me open it up to questions. You all have your, you can unmute your mic, you can ask a question, and we'll spend some time, keeping in mind that no question one is a bad question, but also question you have, someone else may have it. The question you have might provide spark someone else's thinking. So feel free. I'll leave it open right now for you to ask a question verbally, or if you want, you can still write it into the chat window. And then if there are no questions, I'll continue to kind of like move forward, but I definitely want to give you some of these challenges. And then if you feel like, you know, maybe I do have a significant challenge, and maybe I can just ask that challenge, maybe as a group, the small group of us, we can work on thinking through that one with you. So there's that. And while you all are thinking about that and developing some of the ability to try and jump at there's a couple of things I want to read. This one right here is one of my favorite quotes. One of the great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Every society has its protectors of the status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent, who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change, right? The change is here, right? It's not here because we said, okay, we want to change. The change is here. We've been placed in it, right? So are you gonna remain vigilant and face that challenge? Or are we gonna hope that it goes it goes away so we can go back to being where things were, right? Knowing that they're gonna be protectors of the status quo and fraternities of the indifferent who want to make sure they can stay the same way. So where are we gonna find ourselves? What tools are we gonna use? What allies do we need? What partners do we need? What resources do we need? How do we broaden our definitions of resources to include more than just the financial resources alone? And then lastly, how do we paint this picture, right? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a great orator, right? He painted a picture where we knew exactly what it was that he wanted, right? He says, little black boys and little white girls playing together, right? So this is a picture of what we wanted to see. Does your organization, do your people know where you want them to go? Have you painted a picture that's clear enough for them, that's easily seen? If people know that you've identified it, they will follow you anywhere. This uncertainty is hurting them even more because they're uncertain about the future of their livelihood, of their organization, of their community. And by lifting the fog, we're providing some answers for them. So I thank you all very much for kind of like listening to me. I hope this was a good conclusion to the adaptive leadership philosophy. I hope you're able to take some of these tools away so you can use them in the future. But I'd still like to see if anybody has any questions that you want to ask before we conclude our discussion. One of your bullet points mentioned finding a confidant to speak truth, but to avoid using an ally. Please explain. That's a good idea. So what happens is that often at times, people only use their allies, right? And at times, sometimes their allies are people who think exactly like them, right? So that everybody thinks a lot about who this is. It's often at times the same old people. So this is a roundabout way saying to, if you want to try and figure out, sometimes you have to go beyond the borders that you see. All right. So I appreciate that, that in a way that's a great question, right? It just really talks about expanding the environment, expanding your circle, and sometimes your geographic circle as well. So very, very good question. Good job. Okay, thanks, Scott. And thank you all for your kind comments. We really appreciate it. The Nonprofit Institute is trying to be here in the way that we see that we have our strength, and it's by work like this, but it's also by having people that we feel are our partners in this effort, people like yourself. So thank you all very much, and we look for the next opportunity to spend time with you. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns or needs any assistance.